afternoon, students, and welcome to today's lecture on the Big Ballers of Antiquity. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we're moving away from the cities and away from the events of ancient Greek sport, and we're turning our gaze to the people who participated, the athletes themselves. Now, athletes in the modern world span a huge spectrum, from your dear old professor, Dr. Rob, playing some incredibly bad golf, or going for an improbably slow run around town, to the LeBron Jameses and Tiger Woodses and Serena Williamses of the professional sports world, who are world-renowned icons. So today, we'll be looking at how that applied in antiquity. Do we get both ends of the spectrum? Could anyone play sports? And if you were indeed a big baller of antiquity, could you become a world-renowned athlete just like those icons today? Well, there's only one way to find out. So whether you're trying to become the greatest of all time, or just want to figure out whether you're allowed at the local gymnasion, journey with me as we investigate athletes in ancient Greece. Alright, so before we dive into the Michael Jordans and LeBron Jameses and Rob Steffens of the ancient Greek world, let's spend a little bit of time talking about the role that sports played more generally. So, sports in ancient Greece, they weren't just for fun. They weren't just for friendly competition. They were like a core part of what it meant to be a manly man in the ancient Greek world. You achieved glory and status, what the Greeks called arete, through demonstrating your excellence in warfare and through sport. And while sport might have been less deadly than war, it was equally as serious and equally as competitive. So, who participated in sport at those highest levels? Do we get low-born Greek citizens rising to the top through their abilities and good genes and hard work and natural talent? Or are we talking about a scenario where a small group of aristocratic Greeks compete with other rich Greeks of the highest socioeconomic classes? Are we talking about a situation that parallels modern-day basketball and football, where many of the sport's top athletes grew up in relative poverty? Or are we talking about the worlds of fencing and lacrosse and polo, where most participants are already born into some status and wealth? Well, it turns out that that's a relatively tough question to answer. And one that scholars have been tackling for quite a while. So, one of the most influential scholars on ancient Greek sport is this guy E.N. Gardner, who was writing like 100 years ago, around 1900. And he envisioned that athletes of ancient Greece, they were noble and aristocratic amateurs in those earliest days. And those noble aristocratic amateurs, they competed for pride and for the love of competition. But as Greek sports evolved, Gardner argued, these aristocratic amateurs, they turned into lower class professionals, competing for money and prizes rather than for the love of the game. Now, this theory stuck around for the better part of a century until H.W. Pleckett challenged it. Pleckett argued that there wasn't really a decline as a result of professionalization. Rather, he shows that even in the later years of Greece, athletes envisioned the valuable prizes they were winning as glorious gifts rather than kind of wages and profit like you would think of if you were in it just for the money. Other challengers, such as Young, writing in the 1980s, argued that Gardner's focus on aristocrats in the earliest days, that was misplaced. And in fact, the lower classes participated in Greek sport right from the start. And let's not forget about good old Koroibos of Elis, the very first Olympic victor ever. He was a mere cook, or a butcher, or a baker, certainly not a professional athlete. Or an aristocrat for that matter. Anyway, other recent scholars push this argument further. They note that the social reorganization of Athens that took place with the advent of democracy furthered the participation of non-elites in sport. So Athens was grouped into 10 tribes, and these tribes each put forth athletes for the Panathenaic Games, drawing on the diverse constituencies that they held. And gymnasia were free to all Greek citizens, and you didn't need to pay an annual fee like you do at your modern gym or country club. Nevertheless, Donald Kyle argues that Greek sport did indeed remain relatively aristocratic, even if that status shifts from an elite status based on birth to an elite status based on wealth over time. He acknowledges that perhaps the middle class could have participated in sport to some extent, and have attended the gymnasia in particular, but there would have been a high enough cost to rigorously competing that the poor just wouldn't have, they just wouldn't have been able to participate. They would have been excluded. So what do we make of all this? Well, it seems that sport did indeed extend beyond just the richest of the rich. And many people argue that the middle classes could have participated as well. Most agree that the poor would have not had the time nor the resources to really train and compete at the highest levels. So if you want to be the best, make sure you come from a good family, or at least one with deep pockets, in order to get the training you need to compete at the highest level. Now, one of the incredibly cool things about the ancient Olympics is that we actually have the names of many of the victors. These victor lists are actually one of the ways that we come up with a date for the original Olympics, counting back from the most recent victor to the very first one using 4-year intervals. Now, most of these victor lists don't provide much information about the winners, their names, and maybe which city-state they came from. But some athletes in Greek antiquity became far better known than just having their name on one of these lists. So let's start with Theogenes of Thasos, one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time. Now, legend has it that he was the son of a priest of Heracles, and it was actually the ghost of Heracles that impregnated his mother. Now, when he was a mere 9 years old, Theogenes was chastised for picking up a giant marble statue weighing hundreds of pounds in the Agora. "Put that down immediately," his mother yelled at him. Now, Theogenes won the Pancration at the Olympics in 476, in addition to 3 different wins at Delphi, 10 at Isthmia, and 9 at Nemea. Incredible performance in the Pan-Hellenic Games. In 480 BC, Theogenes defeated the reigning boxing champ at the Olympics. But he became so worn out in that competition that he couldn't then compete in the Pancration, the other event he'd signed up for. And he actually had to pay a huge fine for wimping out on that one. Kind of rude to treat such a decorated victor that way. Anyway, upon his death, his hometown Thasos put up a huge bronze statue of Theogenes. And when someone threw it into the sea, the whole town underwent famine until it was restored. I guess he could dish out punishment even after his death. Now anyway, perhaps the most famous wrestler of all time was Milo of Croton. I mean, he was the Undertaker of his time, the dead man. Anyway, Croton is a Greek city-state in southern Italy, and he won the wrestling event at the Olympics a whopping 6 times over the course of 20 years in the late 6th century BCE. But that was just part of his total of 31 Pan-Hellenic victories across a quarter of a century. But Milo wasn't just impressive in the ring. He was just as impressive at the dinner table. He was reputed to have eaten 40 pounds of meat in one sitting and drank 8 quarts of wine to go along with it. On another occasion, he ate an entire 4-year-old bull. I mean, this is like Andre the Giant level stuff. Legend has it that he could bust a rope with his head just by clenching his jaw, and that no one could move him as he stood solidly on a greased discus. Nobody could move him off of there. When he finally did lose at the Olympics in wrestling, it was because the younger guy tired him out by running away. and they all still carried him out on their shoulders out of the stadium for his lifelong heroics in that sport. And once on the battlefield, he dressed up like Heracles himself, with the lion skin and the club, and the invading group, they fled the scene at the sight of this mythical hero. Other victors are less well known today, but they still flourished in antiquity. So the family known as the Diagorids from the island of Rhodes produced half a dozen Olympic victors in boxing and wrestling in the Pancration. And Polydamas of Scotussa was so good at the Pancration that his strength became legendary. He said he was to have killed a lion barehanded, just like Heracles. And once he captured a bull and held it so tightly that the bull had to pull off its own hoof just to escape. The Persian king heard of Polydamas' feats and invited him to court, where he defeated 3 of the immortals, the elite bodyguards of the king, all at the same time. And we still have the statue base that shows a picture of the Persian king watching Polydamas fight on one side, and then watching the warrior with a lion skin on the other side. Alright, now being a legit hero in ancient Greece was more than just accomplishing impressive feats and having some cool stories that people told about you. Heroes weren't the same as gods in ancient Greece. Heroes died after all. But they held a power greater than normal people, and after their death, heroes were worshipped, frequently at their gravesite or at a statue of them, and it was thought that this could bring some sort of power or benefit, or some sort of healing to the worshipper. That's right, heroes had power after death. And we can see that in a few of the athletes we just talked about. So after his death, Theogenes of Thasos was able to cause famine when his statue was thrown into the sea, and then restore agricultural fertility when that statue was restored and respected. And Polydamas of Scotussa, who we just heard about, he was also said to bring healing to worshippers who visited his statue at the site of Olympia. Another hero from the world of ancient Greek sport, we have Cleomedes of Astapaleia. Now Cleomedes was renowned for his strength and his skill in boxing, but at the Olympics in 492 BCE, he accidentally killed his opponent. Now this wasn't necessarily illegal, but you weren't supposed to try to kill the other person. And the judges in this circumstance deemed it intentional, and as a result they disqualified Cleomedes from the competition. Cleomedes got so mad that upon his return to Astapaleia, he tore down an entire school building, killing 60 poor children inside. Ouch, that's gotta hurt. Anyway, why you gotta take it out on the children, Cleomedes? You're better than that. But things don't end there. The townspeople were understandably furious at this, and they started chasing Cleomedes, trying to stone him to death. He took refuge in the temple of Athena, and there he climbed into a little chest to hide from the angry mob. When the townspeople broke into the sanctuary and opened the box, poof, Cleomedes was gone. They then went to the oracle at Delphi to ask what happened to poor old Cleomedes, and the oracle let them know that he was no longer mortal, and that he should be worshipped as a hero. Pretty weird and twisted fate for a famous boxer of Greek antiquity. So, to conclude here, athletes in Greek antiquity could transcend just being famous. They could become legitimate heroes, which in ancient Greece wielded some sort of power after death. Future generations would venerate these heroes, either at their graves or at their statues. In return, these athlete heroes would bestow blessings upon the pious. Sort of gives a new meaning to athletes being heroes of the people. Now, athletes don't just become magically renowned throughout the Greek world, though, becoming heroes and throwing down blessings after death. It takes some good publicity to make this sort of thing happen. Enter Pindar of Thebes. Our man Pindar here lived in the 5th century BCE, the 400s, right during the classical period in Greece. And he became world-renowned, not for playing sports, but for writing about athletes. That's right, he was one of the world's first sports journalists. Now, Pindar wrote a particular type of text called a victory ode, which commemorated the victors at the Panhellenic Games. Now remember that these victors only got a botanical crown or wreath for winning one of the events themselves. But they'd also get commemorated in poetry and song too, often paid for by their home city-state. Pindar's victory odes gives us a glimpse into what the ancient Greeks thought it looked like and what it took to be a great athlete. He highlights great genes, a noble family, athletic ancestors, and the blessings of the gods. But he also mentions the importance of hard work and training in becoming a worthy victor. Now, these odes would have often been commissioned by the family of the athlete or by the city-state of the victor. And Pindar was the most famous author of these songs. And that's right, they'd be performed as poetry or sung as songs. The most famous in antiquity, just like he's the most famous and accomplished to historians today, right? So Pindar was the most famous then, he's also the most famous now. And we learn from these that an athlete should act humbly in victory and act morally strong in addition to being physically strong and fit. Get too proud or cocky? Well, that just wasn't a good characteristic for an athlete deserving of an ode. Just as victories elicited poems and praise, defeat brought about feelings of shame. We see in Pindar's poems, the losers slink back to their hometowns, not to be feted with praise for their strong attempts, but rather to be mocked and reviled by citizens who knew of their defeat. Sometimes this was taken to the extreme in Pindar's poems, where it was considered better to die than to lose. And perhaps this was hyperbole, but nonetheless, it shows something of the value of the victor in ancient Greek athletics. Just like Pindar's victors became famous for their athletic prowess, Pindar himself became famous for his talents writing. He boasted that if an athlete wanted to be remembered for all of eternity, it was he that they should commission to commemorate that feat. And for these talents, Pindar got quite handsomely paid himself. He became wealthy, and philosophers like Aristotle even critiqued him for being in it more for the money than for the glory of good writing poetry. Aristotle jokes that a contemporary of Pindar once refused to write a victory ode for a mule race, and then, once the payment went up in value, he praised those very same mules as daughters of storm-footed horses. Just like today, there's nothing wrong with demanding good compensation for your talents. Alright, now in this section, I'd like to give you a sense for what these victory odes contained. This ode was written by Pindar for Hieron, the tyrant, or that is the kind of sole leader of the city of Syracuse, in Sicily. He won a chariot race at the Olympics in 476 BC, and this ode was commissioned to be performed upon his return to his home city-state of Syracuse. Here's an excerpt, a little bit of that ode. Water is best, and gold, like a blazing fire in the night, stands out supreme of all lordly wealth. But if, my heart, you wish to sing of contests, look no further than any star warmer than the sun, shining by day through the lonely sky, and let us not proclaim any contest greater than Olympia. From there glorious song unfolds the wisdom of poets, so that they loudly sing, the son of Cronus, when they arrive at the rich and blessed hearth of Hieron, who wields the scepter of law in Sicily, many flocks reaping every excellence at its peak, and is glorified by the choicest music, which we men often play around his hospitable table. Come, take the Dorian lyre from its peg. If the splendor of Pisa and if Pherenicus placed your mind under the influence of sweetest thoughts, when that horse ran swiftly beside the Alpheus, not needing to be spurred on in the race, and brought victory to his master, the king of Syracuse, who delights in horses. Then Pindar goes on to tell the story of the foundation of the Olympic Games, starring Pelops, the son of Tantalus, who betrayed the gods by feeding them human flesh, and then Pelops' chariot race with Oenomaus. So the poem picks up a little bit later with the race itself. Honoring him, the god gave him a golden chariot, and horses with untiring wings. He overcame the might of Oenomaus, and took the girl as his bride. She bore 6 sons, leaders of the people eager for excellence. Now he has a share in splendid blood sacrifices, resting beside the ford of the Alpheus, where he has his attendant tomb, beside his altar that is thronged with many visitors. The fame of Pelops shines from afar in the races of the Olympic festivals, where there are contests of swiftness of foot and the bold heights of toiling strength. A victor throughout the rest of his life enjoys honeyed calm, so far as contests can bestow it. But at any given time, the glory of the present day is the highest one that comes to every mortal man. I must crown that man with the horse song in the Aeolian strain. I am convinced that there is no host in the world today who is both knowledgeable about fine things and more sovereign in power, whom we shall adorn with the glorious folds of song. A god is sent over your ambitions as a guardian, Hieron, and he devises this as his concern. If he does not desert you soon, I hope that I will celebrate even in greater sweetness, sped by a swift chariot, finding a helpful path of song, when I come to the sunny hill of Cronus. For me the muse tends her mightiest shaft of courage. Some men are great in one thing, others in another, but the peak of the farthest limit is for kings. Do not look beyond that. May it be yours to walk on high throughout your life, and mine to associate with victors as long as I live, distinguished for my skill among Greeks everywhere. Now, today's past meets present seems pretty obvious, right? We've seen today that athletes in antiquity could become nearly superhuman, right? Becoming Greek heroes with perhaps legendary feats and gaining power from their athletic success. And today's athletes are similar, right? The advent of the internet means that sports stars are now known worldwide, with millions of followers on social media. Charles Barkley proclaimed 3 decades ago that athletes shouldn't be role models. Teachers and parents should be role models instead. But in today's world, athletes have taken a prominent role in speaking their views on society, whether that's kneeling at a football game, refusing to go to the White House, or putting your fist in the air after a victory at the Olympic Games. But what I want to focus on today, in today's past meets present, is on the legendary aspect of athletic feats in the modern world. The kind of urban legends that have become attached to modern athletes in the same way that Cleomenes was reported to have brought down a school building, or Milo of Croton was said to be able to bust a rope using only his head and clenching his jaw. Let's take a look at this in the world of baseball. Alright, now going back into baseball history, our first legend, we have the legend of Babe Ruth, that's right, calling his shot. It was Game 3 of the 1932 World Series, with the Yankees going up against the Chicago Cubs. And in the 5th inning, Ruth pointed to center field with his bat, and the video footage confirms this. And then he rocked a 400-plus foot home run to center. Now, no one really knows whether he was predicting a home run, or pointed to the fans, or just stretching out a little bit. But the point definitely happened, and the home run was rocked. And the next day, the newspaper headline ran, "Ruth calls shot as he puts home run number 2 in side pocket." That day, a legend was born. Now, our second legend revolves around Gaylord Perry, one of the best pitchers from the 1960s. Now, Perry was a pitcher, and by no means was he a hitter. And one day in 1963, it said that a reporter asked him if he would ever hit a home run. And Gaylord Perry responded and said that they'd put a man on the moon before that ever happened, right? They'd put a man on the moon before he ever hit a home run. Fast forward 6 years to July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon. Only hours later, on the very same day, Gaylord Perry hit his first ever career home run. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Alright, anyway, let us conclude with Boggs, Wade Boggs, of the Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees. Now, Boggs was of course a legend on the field, batting .328 over his career. But where he became a mythical hero was on a cross-country flight where this legend, or where legend has it, that he drank 64 beers. That's right, 64 freaking beers on one cross-country flight. Is that even possible? Don't try it and find out. Anyway, Boggs has denied that the number was that high, but perhaps we will never know. All right, you have made it to the end of another episode, and today we have looked at the role of the athlete in ancient Greek society. We've seen that there's continued debate about how democratic or meritocratic athletics actually was. Some argue that it was mainly a pursuit of the aristocratic wealthy, others that it was a venue that evened the playing field by letting talent be the judge. We've also seen that athletes could become famous throughout the Greek world for their feats, right? Especially feats of strength and combat, with fighters like Theogenes of Thasos and Milo of Croton and Cleomenes of Astypaleia. Now sometimes those tales grew so tall that these athletes would become actual heroes, imbued with power and worshipped after their death. That fame wouldn't be possible, of course, without a little publicity. And Pindar's victory odes helped spread the legends of the best Greek athletes far and wide across the known world. So, next time you play ball, make sure you have someone there to record your impressive skills and sing your praises. Do that, and you might just live on in the annals of history. Just a few lessons you can learn from athletes in ancient Greek society.